Hello and welcome to the Uncapped Podcast, brought to you by Roasthouse Pub, one of Frederick's finest craft beer and culinary destinations, where great people come to drink amazing beer. Visit them to track their taps and menu at roasthousepub.com or download the digital pour app to track what's on tap.
This is episode 104, and I'm your host, Chris Sands. Today we have Scott Harris, the founder and general manager of Catoctin Creek Distillery from Purcellville, Virginia, who came up to visit today. Thanks for joining me, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
So, how far away is it's about what, half hour or so from here?
That's right. We're just across the Potomac from Brunswick, basically.
It's amazing how much mental time that river adds to the drive, because everything there seems so much more further away than it is if you're to go. But in my mind, it's like, oh, it would take forever to get there.
Yeah, I know. It feels the same way for us too. You know, it's weird to think, like, as the crow flies, like Purcellville is only 5 miles from Leesburg, and yet nobody ever goes to those two cities all the time. You know, it's like you're either on the Maryland side or you're on the Virginia side.
It's like that invisible line and the river are huge mental roadblocks.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about you. What did you do before you decided to open a distillery?
So I was a computer guy. So I graduated from Georgia Tech, and I worked in telecom and government contracting for a long time. So one of the first jobs I had when I was graduating in the early 90s was working for a phone company that did software for what we now call 911. So basically, in the early 90s, the ability to dial a number and have medical information and address information pop up on a screen for a first responder, like that was new, and I was helping work on a system to design that. So it was kind of cool and productive, and I worked for that company for a long time, and I mostly focused on broadband technology. So, fiber optics, what we today would call FiOS, right? We were doing early development on that. Broadband modems, which is now, Comcast, Xfinity, and DSL, which has kind of gone by the wayside, but it's like your Verizon, DSL line to your house. All that stuff. And then I would say like 2001, living here in Virginia, the market was crashing, telecom business was going under. And so I transitioned into government contracting like 3 months before 9/11. And so I was working for the U.S. Navy doing, classified security stuff for the Navy. And again, that felt very productive, especially after 9/11. There was a lot of, doing work that was saving people's lives. And then, as I started to get older and I started to approach 40, so this was around 2008-ish, I started having just a real midlife crisis, and like, man, I do not want to sit in a room typing on this keyboard for the rest of my life.
That sounds so familiar.
So, basically I started to think about, well, what's my exit plan? What am I going to do? Like, this dialogue running in your head with your alter ego, right? Well, you got to be responsible. You got kids in school. What are you going to do? And so the answer is, well, I don't know. I used to work in a winery. I like doing that, and it's like, well, there's, 50 wineries in Loudoun County. And I'm like, well, I like whiskey, and so basically I brought this idea of starting a whiskey distillery up to Becky, my wife, and she's a chemical engineer, so she had worked for years in manufacturing industry, so making computer parts, making the styrofoam containers that you take home food from the restaurant in, making contact lenses and things like that. And as a chemical engineer, I was like, hey, you'd make a great distiller. Why don't we start this business together?
So much of it is chemistry.
Totally. And she runs all of our production operations because of her background. And the miracle really for us was that she said yes, that she was willing to give it a try, and basically the business plan. So
maybe she had a touch of the midlife crisis also?
Yeah, she was definitely looking for a change, and so, I think the business plan at the time was, let's take all this money that we saved, we weren't wealthy people, we didn't have any inheritance or anything, and let's take all the money we saved for 20 years of working as engineers and plow it into this business and see if we can make it go. It was a big, scary move.
I worked as a government contractor for a little while also. My job was much less fulfilling. I monitored Census Bureau servers for a while overnight, and it was miserable.
Yeah.
I was useless.
There are some really good jobs out there, but and I think maybe it's just part of the human condition. Like after 20 years in a certain industry, like I just wanted some change. I wanted to work with my hands. I wanted to do something that I could make, and produce and see it on a shelf somewhere. And something more than just PowerPoint charts for the rest of my life. Yeah,
there is definitely something very satisfying to having a tangible product that you've created.
Right. I think a lot of brewers can really appreciate this too. Once you have done the work of like the mash, right? You've spent all day cooking something, in a pot, right? And then at the end of the day, you've now transferred it to the fermenter and put it to bed, right? You're like, the weekend is mine. Like I have done my work and now the work is done and this will take care of itself and ferment and I can go home tonight, and have a good beer or something like that. So that's kind of, it's kind of gratifying to close out a work week after, a pretty hard, type of job.
And what you're making is very enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. I agree.
So in 2008, what was the legal climate for opening a distillery? Because the vast majority of craft distilleries in this area, I'm not very familiar with Virginia's laws, but because Virginia seems to have even fewer distilleries than Maryland has.
Yeah, Virginia's tough. It's a tough state to be in. So set the stage, like 2008, 2009, we started the company in 2009, February of 2009. So we're coming up on our 10th anniversary next year. And when we were doing that, the words that were dominating the headlines were things like Lehman Brothers, too big to fail. All of that stuff was happening, right? So financial environment was like, apocalyptic.
That's what I didn't even think about that. How did you get any kind of financing too?
So that was our second big miracle, right? The first was Becky saying yes. And the second one was, and she was kind of sly about it. She was like, well, why don't you take your business plan to the bank and get some financing? And I think she entirely thought, the bank is going to say no. Of course the bank is going to say no, right? And then she will have been the supportive, loving spouse. And now get over your midlife crisis, go back to work, and let's get our kids fed.
We can unify against the banks being the bad guy for squashing your dreams.
and the second miracle for us was the bank said yes. And so with no experience, 25 pages of business plan on paper, they gave us a $250,000 loan for starting our business. And I still today can't understand why they did it. But
so maybe it was an underwriter who hadn't been watching the news, or
you know what? What they told us is that they stress tested the business plan and it was just really tight. And thank God. I mean, so we were able to get started, and that was a moment where we were like, holy crap! Now we have this money. We have to do this. Like we're bound. Now the legal environment, the regulatory environment. It was actually, I was government contractor, so I was, very well prepared for putting together the license packet with the feds. Everything, you dot all the I's, you cross all the T's, you leave nothing out, right? And so when they ask for all these things, a lot of times where people get into trouble is like, well, how dare they ask for my bank records? And it's like, well, that's not your choice. If getting a license is not a right, it's a privilege. And so,
and if there's a question asked, they want it answered to a T, not what you think they're asking or a vague answer.
Right. And as a government contractor, you know how to answer questions when the government asks questions. And so, our packet was pretty tight. So that went actually really easily. And from a locality perspective, most of the zoning and fire marshals and things like that didn't know what we were. And so we got relatively easy approval at the time. It was actually harder to get approval for our move in 2013 than when we started in 2009. And the biggest thing that we struggled with was getting zoning approval. At first, we wanted to be located out in the county, kind of a setting similar to like Old 690, a little thing with some land, a nice building, just kind of the same environment like you see a lot of the wineries. And the county looked at our business and they said, well, that's industrial. You're going to have to go down to Dulles Airport area and put it there. And we're like, we're not industrial. We're ag. We see farmers every single day. They bring us grain and we give them spent mash for their cows. And we need to be near the farms. And they're like, no, you're industrial. And so the thing.
I don't care what you think.
Right. And the thing that really worked for us, though, was that the town of Purcellville, whose town zoning trumps county zoning, said, well, we see the tourism potential in this business. We want you in town, and we will approve it. And they actually had to change some laws because there were still some Prohibition era laws in the town ordinances that said no distilleries in town, period. And so they got that law changed. And when they did, there was a town council meeting. It was on a Wednesday or something, and the only two people in the room as the audience were myself and my banker. And we both wanted to see this go through, and that was a green light, and that's why we're in town of Purcellville today.
That's nice. So it's always has it been legal then in Virginia for distilleries to operate for a long time?
For the most part, yes. I mean, so like A. Smith Bowman and Laird's have been in Virginia since Prohibition, right? I don't know about Bowman, but it's been a long time for them, and Laird's since Prohibition. It's been legal, but there's no craft carve out, right? And so, so there's no special privileges. Like in the wineries and the breweries, there's basically a right to exist. So you can trump any zoning issue and say, I have a right, I'm a farmer, I have a right to put my business in this county. And the county people can't fight you on it. But we don't have the laws for beer, the laws for wine are totally different from the laws for whiskey. And so we have much stricter things that we have to abide by.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so that makes sense why there's so few. So few.
Right.
And
when we started, there were 6, and today there's 60. So there has been a big growth, but it's still a very restrictive environment. You look at in Loudoun County, there's 50 wineries. There's probably 50 breweries now. There's 2 distilleries.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. And like it's
why there's a reason.
Crazy that there's only 2.
Yeah, there's a reason. It's hard, and the state takes its fair share of everything we do. So when we sell in our tasting room, first of all, we're limited in our pours. So unlike a brewery or winery, you can get 4 half-ounce pours, and that's it. And then you have to go home, and we can't pour anymore. So it's really not a pub environment. People expect it to be, where they can come in and drink and enjoy all day, but we can't do that. It's not allowed. And then the second big hindrance for us in the tasting room is that the state takes 55% of all revenue from the tasting room.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so if we sell $1 million in the tasting room, the state has taken $550,000 of that million. So that's a tough business. When you think about somebody.
So why'd you open in Virginia?
Exactly. It is our home. We love it, and we live in Purcellville, half a mile from the distillery. It could have been easier elsewhere. But I sort of take a long view, and we've been working very collaboratively with the ABC, actually, and every year we just try to get it a little bit more modernized, modernizing these old laws. And slowly but surely we're making progress on that.
So where are most of those other 60 of the 60 distilleries? Are they all further south?
Yeah, we're the northernmost distillery in Virginia, which is kind of cool little stat. Most of them, you could, put a lot of them down near Charlottesville. Richmond, there's a few. There's a couple out in the Norfolk area, and a couple up and down the spine on 81.
Is it just that those the counties down there are more friendly to distilleries, or is it just that's where they ended up opening?
Virginia is a very big state, right? I mean, people don't realize how big it is. It's about half the size of Texas.
It is silly big because there's so many times. Like I think I'll see something like, I want to go to Richmond for this, and then I'll look and
it's like 3 hours.
I always forget Richmond's forever away.
Right, and I mean my parents live in Charlotte, North Carolina, right, and so we drive all the way down 81. It's like 7 hours till you leave Virginia. It's huge.
Well, that was then there was because it was in something in Roanoke. I wanted to go that I thought I would go to while I was in Richmond.
Right.
And I looked and how can it be another 4 hours away?
Exactly.
It's like being in California where it's a day to get to someplace else.
Right. And so that's kind of it's a big state, and I think that's why we have the space to have 60 distilleries, pretty spread out.
Yeah, because we have four in Frederick,
right,
and 3 right in the city. So it surprised me once I started paying more attention to Loudoun County, how few distilleries there were, and then I was also surprised how many breweries they had. I didn't realize there were so many.
We have 6 breweries in Purcellville. It's a town of 8,000 people.
It's insane. It's a lot of thirsty people in that one area.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a real quick break to thank Roasthouse Pub for their continued support of the Uncapped podcast. That we would not be able to continue to do this without them. And actually, one of your someone in your area is going to be competing tomorrow in their spaghetti dinner contest, where they used to have the breweries bring their own, it's Mom's Spaghetti Dinner that they call it, their recipes, but apparently some people didn't like the idea of their mom's recipes losing. So now it's just a battle between two breweries. They have I think 3 beers each on tap at Roasthouse Pub, and then at the end of the night, the people there vote on which beer lineup they liked best. So Vanish is the returning champion for the Mom's Spaghetti Dinner night, and Duclaw is battling them to see if they can dethrone them. And then next month, every month Roasthouse Pub has this amazing beer dinner, and they've done one cocktail once. You should talk to him about that. He does a 5-course meal paired with beer. For that one, it was a beer and spirit mixtures. He did some beer cocktails, and then did a combination of beer or a spirit combination. But in October is the often anticipated Halloween special, where your neighbor, Adroit Theory, comes every month. So fitting right into their motif.
Yeah, nobody's more appropriate for Halloween than those guys.
And Chef Nico does not pull any punches with that dinner. I think last year there were crickets, grasshoppers, and just an array of things that sound absolutely repulsive, but somehow he makes them absolutely delicious.
It's kind of fun.
So I highly recommend keeping your eyes out for when the tickets to that dinner go on sale, because it sells out. So once again, thank you, Chef Nico and Roasthouse Pub, for your support. But yeah, I mean, he's absolutely, Adroit Theory is the right person to have for.
Yeah, we've done a few collaborations with those guys. They're really cool.
Yeah, we had them on probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now at this point, it was an interesting episode. Did you see the latest issue of Uncapped yet?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
So when we were interviewing him, he just made this one comment that I latched onto, where he said that we were asking him about weird ingredients he uses in beers. And he said, I'd put hot dogs in beer if I had to. And that just was burned into my head. So we got some of his glassware, took a hot dog, put it in there, and filled it up with beer. And so there's that quote and a hot dog shoved in a beer on the cover of it. There were people here that hated that idea, but so far I've only heard good things, that people thought it was funny. So I think we made the right decision.
Absolutely.
So I guess at this point you have the luxury too now of your craft distillery that's been around long enough that you have a steady stream of aged product.
Right.
So whereas especially in Maryland, where it's newly legal, everyone's just now only releasing their 2-year aged spirits. You have, I assume, 10-year aged stuff that'll be coming out.
Yeah, not quite 10, but close to it. Yeah. It's interesting because we started with whiskey right from the start. That was the product that Virginia ABC said they would buy, and so the first stuff we were putting out was brown, but it was, a month and a half old. You look at the old labels on the back, and it's 1.5 months. It's wow, really young, but it was brown and it tasted good, and it was good enough to get us started. White whiskey was never really a very viable product for us. It's just, we had a very good white whiskey. It won a lot of awards, but it's a tough category. And people buy a bottle out of curiosity, but usually not a second bottle or third bottle. And so for us, whiskey was really all about everything we wanted to make and everything we wanted to do. And we've also, since the beginning, been making brandy. We have all these wineries around us, and I used to work in a winery, and so working with winemakers, that process, we enjoyed that. And so we incorporated that into our business as well, doing brandy. And so some of the things that we have coming out for our 10th anniversary in February are going to be really exciting. We'll have our 4-year-old Rabble Rouser, which is our bottled in bond whiskey. It's a older version of the product that we are our big flagship brand, which is Roundstone Rye.
Okay.
The Rabble Rouser is much more assertive and boisterous. It's a really fun whiskey. And then we also have some cool bottled and bond brandies coming out in February as well. What we call our 1757 brandy, which is the year that Loudoun County was founded. And our brandy coming out in February then would be 8 years old. So that's some of the oldest stuff we've ever made.
Oh, wow. I just realized we've made it like 20 minutes in and we haven't tried anything yet. I feel like that is, yeah, like we need to remedy that.
Yeah, I'll start pouring. I'll start with the 80 proof Roundstone Rye. The Roundstone Rye, this one actually, we just this week received word that we won a double gold in the New York World Wine and Spirits Competition. So we're super proud of that.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. You actually won quite a few medals at that, didn't you?
Yeah. All four of these guys that I brought today won silvers or gold, double gold for that. The double gold we're really proud of because, that means every single judge that tasted it said it was a gold. So that's really cool.
That was one thing I found interesting with spirit competitions where you're not judged against the competition. You're judged on the merits of it. So
right. And the flaws and the characteristics that it should have, as sort of like a dog show competition, right? So they say this is a pug, and what is a pug supposed to look like for the Kennel Club?
Not mine.
Mine either. Are you a pug owner?
Yeah.
Me too. But
he's really old and he's rough.
Yeah, so is ours. But the thing I think is beneficial about the spirits competitions is that they are judging these things blindly, right? So all of the preconceptions of age and, what if it's from Kentucky or not, or who the master distiller is, go by the wayside, and they just taste the juice for what the juice is. And so this Roundstone Rye is about 2 years old. It is our purposefully made youthful spirit. So because it's a youthful spirit, a 2-year-old whiskey, it's a grain-forward whiskey. So often the flavor of the grain itself is lost a long time in the barrel. And so this one, Becky is really striving for a nice balance between the wood and the whiskey itself, right? So you can taste the rye.
I was going to say the rye is very forward in this one.
Right.
You can really get the...
Right, and why not, right?
Yeah.
It's a pleasurable, smooth, easy drinking rye. At 80 proof, it is very smooth and very easy. Becky would call this her front porch sipper, right? This is just, you don't need a rock. If you want a rock, that's great, but you can just sit on your front porch in the swing and enjoy this one.
Yeah, and you're right. It is ridiculously smooth, and I do like the amount of rye you pick up because I love rye anything.
Yeah, it's funny because when we first started the company, people would tell us, well, that doesn't taste like rye, and we were actually a little bit offended by that. We're like, well, what do you mean? It's 100% rye. How can it not taste like rye?
We couldn't get any more in there.
Right, and it's what we realized is that of course, 80% of the ryes that were on the shelf, and even today, are all made in one plant in Indiana, right? And so even though you see these different labels, these different bottles, people are like, oh, well, that must be what rye tastes like. And so a lot of the adjectives or the nouns that people are using to describe them are things like dill or grassy and things like that. And that's a flavor that's not in this whiskey. It tastes like rye. You can taste the spice of it from the rye, but you're not getting dill and you're not getting that green vegetal kind of flavor. And for us, what we would say is this is more sort of fruity nutty is kind of the profile on that.
Yeah, I took a whiskey making class at McClintock, and they had on one part of it, they projected up, I can't remember what magazine it was from, but it shows like the family tree of where the juice is made. I
think that's GQ.
And that's where it was from. Yeah. So it had like the trunk of this juice is used by like these 20 big name brands, and it's really just the barrel aging that makes a difference.
And there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with that, right? There's a lot of judgment in things like this, and the whiskey in those bottles is very, very good. What we always strive for is transparency, right? If you're making whiskey in somebody else's bottles, you should be transparent about it. And there were some that haven't been, and that's a little skivvy, I think. They need to be a little more honest.
Yeah, that was one of the, because it it hasn't even maybe like a year and a half that I started paying any attention, even trying spirits. I used to have to give the disclaimer to every guest that if I made an awful face, it wasn't indicative of their product. It was because I don't like spirits. But it turns out I do. I just like good spirits.
Good spirits, right.
And so as I started learning more about everything, that was one of the things I was shocked by, is that like not everyone makes their own product.
Right,
Because so many places just buy pre-made juice and then put it in barrels.
Right. Or buy them in the barrels and just bottle it. And our attitude on that was, look, I didn't quit a perfectly good day job to bottle somebody else's whiskey, right? We wanted to make whiskey and make it ourselves, and that's what we do, from grain to bottle every single day.
So there's got to be like next to no personal satisfaction when like all you did was pour something.
Well, I mean, the personal satisfaction comes from the money rolling into your wallet. It's an easier business plan to have, right? And we don't have that money rolling into our wallet. So, part of me says I'm a fool for doing it the hard way, but, but we want to do this. This is what we do. So,
But that would be boring, though.
Probably.
Money only makes you so happy.
And there's certain compromises, right? So a lot of the people doing it are like, well, this is how we're going to get started until we get our own juice online. And I think one of the challenges with that business plan is you become sort of addicted to the cheap crack of the cheaper liquid that you can buy and then put in a barrel. When you start doing it from grain to glass, it is very, very difficult from a business plan perspective. You've got to run a tight ship to keep things profitable.
It's surprising that you can buy a finished product cheaper than being able to make it yourself.
Well, it's all economies of scale, right?
Because they're making so much.
Huge factory. Yeah. Whoa, sorry. MGP is a huge factory, right? And so, they can make stuff for nickels, and for us it's dollars. So the scale there, we will never be able to compete on price with that. But we like to think they can't compete on quality. Like, this is a quality whiskey that is winning these amazing medals for a reason.
What kind of still do you have?
We have 2 copper pot stills. So they're German stills. They are what we would consider hybrid pot column stills. So it's basic pot still with a small column on top that we can adjust for what we're making. The second spirit, just to tee up what we're pouring right now, is our Roundstone Rye 92 proof Distiller's Edition. So the Distiller's Edition, as I pan across the screen here, is basically Becky's sort of distiller's cut. So what happens in this process, all of these whiskeys are single barrel whiskeys, which means every single bottle came from one barrel. We don't cross blend to get uniformity. So to get uniformity, right, we want that because restaurants need a consistent product.
Yeah.
What we're doing is when we take samples from the barrel before bottling, Becky will taste it around the members of the production staff, predominantly women. And they will decide, what it tastes like. And if it's smooth and sweet and buttery, it's going to be this 80 proof product that you tasted first. But every now and then, about 1 barrel in 10 shows up really spicy and aggressive. And so when she finds those barrels, she will bottle those at a higher proof, at 92 proof, and that becomes her Distiller's Edition. So it's a higher proof whiskey that's nice in cocktails. It's also nice if you're like the drinking whiskey person, Yeah,
I can't. I'm having trouble coming up with the right phrase to use that, but it's like an assault on your senses, not in a bad way.
Right.
Like
it's more assertive. It's more assertive, right? It's got hair on its chest. It's a cool whiskey. It's amazing to think though it's the same juice going into the barrel, and it's just the differences of the wood and the weather and the location and all those kinds of things.
So that would be, those two could have been from the same batch,
from the same day.
But that one just proofed down a little bit more, and just because of the
wood. Yeah. So like I said, we find it about 1 barrel in 10 is when we're pulling out of the barrels, and these are barrels that were on the same truck from the same cooperage. So it's kind of cool that it develops differently like that.
And that's barrel aging is one area I want to learn more on. I feel like I've learned a decent amount, but it's so interesting and
there's so much chemistry happening. Yeah.
And it's the perfect blend of science and art.
Yeah.
Totally. The what I've learned so far has been just fascinating.
So what's interesting in this process, a lot of people don't put enough importance on some of the things that are the most important for flavor. So, one of the most important factors of flavor, first of all, is ingredient selection, right? So not just the grain, but also the yeast, right? As a beer maker or a beer consumer, you know that yeast can change everything, right? So that is the first thing. So fermentation is where you create all these flavors. And then everybody thinks distillation is the magic where you're pulling the flavors out. Well, really all you're doing is selecting flavor, right? You're extracting what's already there. If you made something crappy, you're extracting something crappy from it, right? So garbage in, garbage out. So you're pulling out the flavor that you've made during that fermentation process. And then you have a basic sort of flavor profile that then goes into the barrel and changes again, right? And so you're marrying that flavor about 50-50, with flavors of vanilla and caramel and flan and, toasted nuts and these complex chemicals that you're pulling from the barrel like a tea bag. And, I
think Graham is enjoying the second one.
But there's oxidization that's happening. And that's the argument that people say that, like these little tiny mini barrels are giving you wood, but they're not giving you the oxidization, which allows it to sort of mellow out and smooth out.
And then all those chemical reactions that take place only over a certain point of time.
Right. And so that's one reason we use a 30-gallon barrel. It's a smaller size barrel, but it still has enough capacity that you have to have that time element involved in it as well. That and the fact that when we started the company, 30-gallon barrel was the biggest barrel that Becky could move by herself. So weighs about 200 pounds.
Yeah, they're not light.
No. So the big ones are like 500 pounds, and there's no way she could have moved those by herself.
What is that, like a 50?
A 53-gallon barrel is about 500 pounds.
Are you using those now?
Well, for some products. We use it for the brandy, and we use it for the rabble rouser.
So one thing I've always wondered from the standpoint of aging, how do you manage that? Like what you're going to sell, what you're going to leave sitting, is it there to age longer? Is it just as simple as deciding that? Or
no, it's a business decision. So there's the process decision of, you've got to know what you are going to, how long you're going to age before you put the product in the barrel. So you've got to make something on the still that is appropriate to the level of age. If we took this product off the still, it's a relatively light style of whiskey. If we took this off the still and then aged it for 20 years, you're going to lose everything, right? It's just going to be bitter and tannic and disgusting, and it'll taste like, rotten aspirins. So you got to know what's going into the barrel and how long you're going to age it.
That's a really good description of something that's going to taste awful.
Right. The rabble rouser, we know a priori, how long it's going to be in the barrel, and so we make it appropriate to that. And you let more of the fusel oils come in, you let more of the stuff, so the new make of that tastes undrinkable. The new make of this is Mosby Spirit. That's a very delicious white whiskey, but the new make of the rabble rouser is oily and kind of bitter. But you know that it's going to be in the barrel for a long time, and those elements are going to smoothen out, right? So you've got to know that ahead of time process-wise. Now, from a fiscal business standpoint, it's totally, about money.
Yeah.
And so how much do you have? If you have endless reserves of money, then you can make whiskey, willy-nilly, as much as you want. Because once you've put it in the barrel, that's now money, capital, cash flow that is tied up for a long time to come, right? And you can't get it until you sell it. And so you can go out of business just producing whiskey willy-nilly, right? And so what we've tried to do is estimate.
And then if you have it in a rick house that's not very stable and it falls apart, then you...
Yeah, right. God forbid. For us, what we've done is we've tried to produce just a little bit more than what we expect our sales to be. And you can't totally predict that. So if you have some surge in sales, you can dip into that, but then we can also pick up production and sort of make up that deficit.
Okay.
So we try to keep a certain level that's going to be enough to sustain us for a year's worth of sales, and then a little bit extra, and that way we're growing it, but we're doing it in a way that's not going to bankrupt our company.
Okay.
So this one I just poured for you. This is our other double gold winner. This is double gold from San Francisco, the cask proof rye. So this is 58% ABV, full cask strength. It doesn't drink like 58%. It's pretty damn smooth.
It's smooth, but you can tell it's there.
Yeah. And what's cool about it, it's not just more alcohol. A lot of times people think cask strength and they just think, ooh, more alcohol, but it's more everything, right? It's concentrated whiskey. It hasn't been diluted into the bottle. And so the wood flavor, the grain flavor, everything is more pronounced. And that's the beauty of cask proof, is you get a really rich whiskey.
Yeah, and I never thought of it from that standpoint, that I whenever I saw stuff as cask proof, I just always thought of it like, okay, that's stronger.
Right, more alcohol.
But I didn't think about it as like
Absolutely.
The way you proof stuff down is you add water,
Right.
which is not only is it diluting the alcohol content, you're
Right.
diluting the flavors.
Right.
And you're right, everything is just more pronounced.
Right. It's like a whiskey concentrate, if you will. And then the nice thing, people that enjoy a cask proof, that prefer cask proof, usually say that, well, they get to add the water themselves, right? So you can add water, and water does amazing things to it. It opens up, and it becomes more aromatic and things like that, but they get to control it.
So how would your average customer, how would they consume this one?
The cask proof, I think most average customers are drinking that, neat in some respect.
Okay.
I, however, have no qualms about doing anything with my whiskey. I made it. I can do what I want, right? So Becky jokes, she can put it in Dr. Pepper if she wants to,
Yeah.
But so I actually have been known to make Manhattans with the cask proof, and it is a really good Manhattan, but it will mess you up. It's basically twice as strong as a normal Manhattan, and so you got to, as Becky tells me, I got to respect the juice.
So it's fun. For the longest time, it was my wife who was the whiskey drinker. So when we went to Ireland and went to Jameson, I didn't even want to try anything.
Really?
The only time I did, I had it with ginger ale.
Yeah.
So and there were people there that found that to be offensive.
Right,
that I would
of course.
pour it. I'm like, well,
it's funny.
Then here you drink it.
My first visit to a Scotch distillery, and I think some of this is for show for the tourists too. Just like what you saw at Jameson. They were like, well, how do you like your whiskey? And as an American, I was like, a couple ice cubes in it, and they're like, oh, and but I think part of that's just for show.
Well, part of their show was they selected people from the tour group to do the full tasting, and then they had Johnny Walker, I can't remember what kind of Scotch, and then they had Jameson to show the difference between the different regions' take on whiskey. And when they got to Scotch, they're like, does anyone know the proper way to drink Scotch? And everyone said no. So they're like, well, we hold it up, check the color, smell it, and then throw it over your shoulder. And of course, my wife was just close to drunk enough that she almost did before they quickly told her not to.
It reminds me of my favorite Scottish joke. Do we have time for a joke?
Yeah, we have. This is the internet. There is no deadline.
So two Scotsmen are together. Let's say MacLeod and MacGregor. And MacGregor is dying. He's on his deathbed. And MacLeod is standing by his side giving him comfort. And MacGregor says to MacLeod, he says, MacLeod, I'm not going to be around much longer. Before I go, I got one request for you. And MacGregor's like, okay, anything you need. And so he says, I want you to take my best bottle of Scotch, and I want you to pour it on my gravestone after I'm gone. So MacLeod says, oh, okay, no problem. He says, but do you mind, lad, if I pass it through my kidneys first? So anyway, there we go. That's my only Scottish joke.
Right. So that was
the cask proof
in 2017. That one.
Yeah.
So which ones did any of these win this last round?
Yeah. So all of these won at least a silver.
Okay.
This last round, the 80 proof won the double gold. In the last go, 2017 in San Francisco, this one won the double gold. So. We luckily have the claim to fame as Virginia's most awarded distillery. So if you hit the website, you can see we've got just a scads of awards for these guys.
Those are the two big competitions, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like the GABF of the...
Absolutely. The San Francisco is probably
the distilling world.
Yeah, totally. The San Francisco one is huge. And it's very well respected because it's done in a very methodical. Thank you. Way.
I'm really proud of myself. Normally, I'm the person that has to say a word at least 10 times before Graham yells at me the right way to pronounce it.
Right. So, methodical way, and the key there is blind tastings, but it's also spirits people. So they're getting people like Derek Brown from Columbia Room to come out and taste these spirits. People who know what they're doing. The New York one, it's actually owned by the same people as the San Francisco one, but the reason they do it in New York is because San Francisco draws a certain set of people, because of travel expenses and things, and New York has a different set, so they get both coasts there, and I think that's useful. So we enter both of those, not every year, but every couple of years, just to get a fresh look on our spirits. The other big competition that I think is pretty well respected is the Beverage Testing Institute. That's tastings.com, and they basically issue medals as well. That's out of Chicago. So that's one that, like a lot of retailers, grocery stores, places like that, really value those remarks. And those are probably three of the top ones. There's hundreds of competitions, right? And you could enter all of them, but if they're not getting you credibility, then I'm not sure
you're just spending money it's interesting, like how you pointed out that the credibility of the judges, because it's recently I've had a few different places ask me if I was interested in judging their competitions. I was like, look, are you holding a competition that is real? Like you want an actual person that can give useful feedback? It's like,
hard work too.
I will respectively decline because I'm maybe a step above grunting good or bad when it comes to.
I don't know how they do it, because there's like 75 spirits that they might taste in a day, and then they have a week of this. That must totally burn them out. But
I took it was a couple months long. We met once a week. I think it was 2 or 3 months long. It was a BJCP judging class.
Oh, oops.
and I mean, that was when I was like, there's no way I could judge anything.
Yeah.
I listen to these people talk about like when they're tasting the beer and describing it, and I was like, I don't know. I tasted some bitterness.
Right. Kind of tasted good. I liked it. Yeah. The tasting spirits is even harder than beer, right? Just because of the higher proof of alcohol, right? That you're going to get numb sooner. Yeah. Even if you're spitting, right? And so
especially because that first taste, then your mouth's just mad that you dumped something that it doesn't necessarily want in there.
And order matters, right? So if you taste something 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you taste it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like your opinion isn't going to be the same on how you do it. And so the really good experts, like Paul Pacult is a spirits writer out of New York, and he talks about his method, and he will dilute it down to 20%. So that you can taste a lot of samples, and then he'll come to it, he'll smell it for an hour, and then come back to it an hour later and smell it again before he even takes a sample. And then over the course of the next 2 hours, he'll take like 3 sips or something like that and write notes on everything. And that's for one sample. And so Becky actually tries to replicate that process when she's barrel proofing for these guys. But it's, like for the guys in the distillery, we're all a bunch of cavemen, right? And so when we get it and she puts it to 20%, we're like, oh my God, it tastes like dirty dishwater. Are you wasting my time? Right? Yeah, it's like we want to drink it at cask proof, but we're not doing something useful. We're just drinking whiskey, And so I think that's where she finds her female staff are a little more methodical about it.
Good job.
Thank you. Let me get a next one here, pouring out here.
So is there... You did these in a certain order. Mm-hmm. Was that purposeful or was so what order? Like, I know how to taste a flight of beer, how you're supposed to taste it.
The same, right? Light to dark. So you start with a Kolsch, or you start with a really light Hefeweizen or something like that, and you might end up with that big Russian stout, right? So if I started you out with the cask proof right away, then you're going to be, like, whoa, and you won't really notice the subtlety of the softer spirit. Mm-hmm. So we start soft and work harder. And then we end with gin, right? Because it's gin, right? It's just it's gonna blow you away. So gin is the thing that we put at the end. And, just to talk a little bit about gin, we've been making gin since the beginning. But the gin is actually, for us, a byproduct of our whiskey production. So in the traditional Scottish distillation method, which is what we use for whiskey, there's a heads, a hearts, and a tails, right? A beginning, a middle, and an end of the distillation. Well, that end part is a bitter spirit called tails, and that has a lot of fusel oils in it. but it's also got a lot of ethanol, and we don't want to waste it and pour it down the drain. So we will redistill it. And by redistilling it, we can pull out the fusel oils and leave ourselves with a neutral rye base that we then infuse with all of these herbs: juniper, coriander, cinnamon, anise, orange peel. It's basically like making a big herbal tea bag.
Do you use a lot of anise?
Not a lot, but there's a lot that comes out.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I like that. I'm the weirdo that loves black jelly beans.
Yeah, yeah. It does give there's a licorice note that definitely is prominent.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah,
it's like on there's a flavor on the very tail end that I'm not quite sure how to identify. That's very pleasant.
Yeah, it's a neat gin. It's not a London Dry. We didn't want to do something derivative. So what we ended up making was essentially an Old Tom style. It's a little sweeter. That rye comes off as very sweet. There's no sugar in there, but it is quite sweet. And the high level of botanical oils and the fact that it's done in a pot still means that it's a really oily gin. It's got a really cool viscous mouthfeel. It's slippery and velvety in some ways.
I really like this.
Yeah, it's neat stuff.
That's also like 2 years ago. If anyone would have told me that I would like gin,
right,
at some point I would have told them to go away, that they were wrong.
We get that every day at the distillery, at the tasting room. You know, people are like, oh, I don't do gin. It's like, come on, man, just taste a little taste. It's not going to kill you. It's like the same alcohol as these guys. You know, just give it a little try.
That's really good.
People usually end up liking it.
How did you choose the mixture
So we had
the
to
botanicals?
We had to experiment, right? So Becky was doing research on gin recipes, and we wanted to do something unique and different. So it's a bit like recipe creation, and then trial and error. So we had a 5-gallon pot still at home, and we were basically doing small test run batches that were, let's use this ratio of herbs. And the herb ratios are very complicated because like 50% by weight of all the herbs that's in there is juniper, right? As it should be, because it's gin. But like you could have if you have 2 pounds of juniper, you might have a half an ounce of orange peel, right? And if you put more, it's going to be really bitter and nasty. And so you can't you've got to really tweak those things. So we went through 11 different recipes to develop this gin. And even after we put it out, the first couple batches, we were still tweaking a little bit. And what's funny is I have all these 1 gallon Gallo wine containers in my basement of gin number 2, gin number 7, And for a long time I was keeping them, and Becky's like, what the hell are you keeping these for? I'm like, I don't know. You're not, she's like, you're not going to drink it, are you? So finally she made me use it as insecticide around the house and stuff. It smells great, but...
Does gin go bad?
No.
Okay.
All of these spirits, high proof, once you're above 40%, stay forever, as long as the bottle is well capped. And even you've seen some of the dusty bottles, from the 1800s.
Yeah. And
the cork is failing and the level is dropping because of evaporation. There's nothing wrong with the spirit. It's just getting more concentrated and there's evaporation happening. But essentially, if it's properly corked, it'll last forever.
So I know you don't do vodka?
We don't. Okay. We don't. Yeah. So funny story about that. When we first started the company, I called the Virginia ABC, who was, to be our biggest customer and our first customer. And I was talking to Neil Ann Brown, who's now retired. She's the lady who used to select every spirit that goes on the shelf in Virginia. And so I was full of enthusiasm and entrepreneurial energy. And so I called her up and I'm like, hey, my name is Scott Harris and I'm so excited and I'm going to be a distiller and I'm going to be in Loudoun County. We're going to make whiskey and all this stuff and it's going to be great. And she interrupts me right in the middle of it because she's just this tired, beleaguered bureaucrat, right? Who has to talk to every liquor company on the globe.
Yeah.
And she's like, just tell me you're not going to make another damn vodka. And I was scratching out of my notebook.
No vodka.
No vodka. Yeah. That's dynamic business planning on the fly right there. It's like, no, ma'am, we're going to make whiskey. And
I would never consider such an abomination.
And this was the period of time when vodka was like jumping the shark, right? There was buttered popcorn vodka and cupcake vodka, and it was just garbage. And that now has been waning. And I think she was at the leading edge of seeing that, we've got too much vodka, it's taking too much room, and nobody's buying your damn jelly bean vodka,
So do you think it's harder or easier when you have that one humongous customer that, if you're in a state that is regulated such that it all goes through the state?
I would say there's good and bad, right? So Virginia ABC, we've now had experience with 26 states, so we know what it's like in both private and control states across the nation, and some European business as well. And the Virginia ABC, for a Virginia producer, gives certain preferences, as I think they should, right? It's a Virginia company. We want to spur Virginia business, right? It's a government entity. So if you can have the whole argument about whether or not government should be in the business of selling alcohol. That's a whole different show, perhaps. But the discussion about, since it's there and it's not going anywhere and that's their charter, then they give preference to Virginia companies. So if a Maryland company wants to come and do business in Virginia, they've got to compete with the big guys, and they've got the same quota requirements to stay on the shelf and the same kind of requirements to get on the shelf. For a Virginia company, it's a little bit less, right?
Okay.
So you can get on the shelf easier and you can stay on the shelf a little bit easier. That doesn't mean you're guaranteed anything, right? Virginia, told everybody, they're like, stop sending us moonshine. We're not putting your moonshine on the shelf, so stop doing it. And everybody was like, well, that's an outrage. You have to. And it's like, no, they don't actually have to. So, and they've got to make money and sell stuff too. And so their thing is, why should I take off a high-producing whiskey that's turning over and making a lot of money and put a white whiskey that's going to collect dust? And so that's the thing that Virginia ABC deals with. So on that side, they're a very good customer. They pay on time every time, and they are really making I think a really strong effort to modernize their stores and make them up to date and have good selections and things like that, where they maybe weren't 15 years ago as good at that. So I think they're doing pretty good. We've been in some other states that are really tough to be in. And I won't name them, but states that neighbor Virginia that are really, really tough as a control state. And there's corruption, and you can Google it and see some of the news that happens in some of these places. We've seen none of that in Virginia. It seems like a very well-run state. So we're grateful for that. Would it be better if it was privatized? Perhaps, but that would be chaos at the beginning. So we're not generally in favor of chaos.
Do you think starting out it made it a little bit easier, or did that make it harder?
No, I agree. It 100% made it easier to be in Virginia. Virginia was our first customer, and every other customer we went to, whether they were private or another state, we're like, well, where else are you? And we could proudly say, well, we're in Virginia, and here's our numbers, and they're pretty good.
So when you came to Maryland, you then, I guess you rely on your distributor then
absolutely,
to get you on shelves in the stores.
That's right. So we have a distributor in Maryland who also covers DC and Delaware for us, Prestige LeDroit. And so they sell in Frederick, they sell in Hagerstown, all over. And it's a partnership, right? But it's a business partnership instead of a business government partnership. So, if they make money, we make money, and if we continue to sell, they keep reordering and things like that.
All right, so I noticed you have one more little thing there hiding off to the side.
Oh, you still saw it.
Which usually contains something special.
Yes, it does. So my little flask here is filled with a little sample of our rabble rouser. So I thought I'd just let you have a sneak peek at that. So nobody has really tasted this one yet. Just a little tiny touch for you.
I like when we get the special.
It's a little dark. Don't worry about the dark. That greenish color is from the flask.
Okay.
I'll drink some too, just to show you it's safe. It's been in this flask for maybe a little longer than it should.
That's another question. How long is it safe to keep spirits in a flask?
Well, what happens with flasks is they're welded and there's seams and stuff like that. I wouldn't keep it. I'd fill it for the football game, take it to the football game, drink it all, and then empty it and let it dry out.
Okay.
Maybe rinse it with water. This one's been about 2 weeks in there, so I apologize for the greenish color. That's not a key feature that we usually go for.
That's not well, maybe I noticed there's a 4-leaf clover on on there, so maybe it just picked that up.
It's actually that is actually a dogwood blossom.
Oh, okay.
That's our logo. It's state of Virginia's state flower.
Now I can see it without the.
It's got the little central piece, which is why everybody, thinks it's a clover, but it's a dogwood.
So this is the one that just won in New York?
No. That was this one here.
Okay.
No, this is Rabble Rouser. This is our 4-year-old bottled in bond coming out in February.
That's good. That one climbs up into your nose.
Yeah, it's 100 proof, so it's a little stronger.
That is why it did.
Yeah, yeah, it's really neat stuff, and it's really rich and delicious and totally different from these guys over here.
It doesn't seem to share any characteristics other than its alcohol.
And what's funny is it's same grain from the same farms that we farm from every one of these bottles. It's
amazing that, like, the slightest little differences throughout the process make such a huge difference in the outcome.
Yeah.
And way more than what you ever would think, too.
Right. Well, and if you think about it, for me, I put it in terms of Scotch, right? You've probably got, 200 different brands of Scotch on the market today, quite a few. And it's a little bitty country, right? The size of West Virginia. And yet, 200 different Scotches all taste completely different, completely different, right? Little tweaks in the process. And, they all have...
Most bad.
They all have they all have 4 things in common, right? Grain, water, wood, and yeast. I mean, that's 4 ingredients. It's a really simple recipe. And yet you get this infinite variety. And that's the beauty of, I think, distilling, is that you get so much variety by just playing with little factors in the process.
Yeah, the one thing I will never start to like or get past is I do not like peaty tasting things. So if it's Scotch that doesn't have the peaty taste to it, I may like it.
Then you may like it, yeah.
Yeah, but anything with that peat moss
I'll tell you what,
flavor
it's an acquired flavor for sure. Some of those are really smoky. I love them, and I've learned to love them. And what you learn is the smoke comes on really early in the process. You get all the smoke on the first few sips and you're like, whoa, smoke, But behind it, like Ardbeg 10-year-old is one of my favorites, is a beautiful, honeyed, really sweet, lovely whiskey. And sort of the reason the smoke is there is very traditional, and so I kind of appreciate that as well. It was the only way to make this stuff back in horse and buggy type days. They would literally dry the process is basically they malt the grain, right, which is germinating it. They spray it with water and let it start to sprout, and then you have to kill it before it consumes all of the sugars in the grain and grows a little wheat thing. And so to kill it, they will put it in an oven and basically heat it up to kill it. In the non-smoky whiskeys, that's a dry propane type furnace, but in Islay, where it was done, it was peat. That was it. They don't have trees. Trees haven't been in Scotland for 1,000 years. And so they would go get these peat, things from the bog, and then they would use that, and they use it in their homes. You go into a traditional Scottish croft, and, it's smoky, and everybody's probably got emphysema because of this, but that acrid, peaty smoke, was what they used to dry the grain, and it infused it into the grain, and that's why it tastes smoky.
So I can respect the tradition. It's still gross.
You just don't have to like it. Yeah, that's fine.
But like it doesn't hold to just there. I can't stand smoked beers.
Fair enough.
That's just not a flavor I enjoy.
What about bacon or?
See, that's fine though. It's just in liquids. Yeah. Smoke in a liquid form.
It's funny because we had somebody do a bacon infusion of this, like a fat wash of our Roundstone rye, and it totally came off like a smoky Scotch. It's really cool because it's the same phenols. It's chemistry-wise, phenols are the thing. And if you were blind tasting, you'd be like, oh, this is some kind of Islay Scotch. It's smoky. So it's just a different way of getting phenols in there.
It's an interesting story about phenols and the chemistry of stuff is I was on a tour of a brewery once, and they said that skunk flavoring from a skunked beer is from UV light striking the beer, and it's because a hop molecules in hops are similar to the musk of a skunk, but they have an extra tail, and it's the UV light severs that tail.
Yep.
And so for the longest time, I was like, yeah, whatever. Like that was a good story to make up.
Right.
But then we did a podcast with a professor from Mount St. Mary's who teaches chemistry through brewing. Yep. So of course I'd ask him. He was like, yeah, it's actually true. I was like, that's amazing.
There's so much amazing
Science
chemistry.
Is awesome.
There's so much amazing chemistry that happens in these processes. We had a story. One of our first distillations in our pot still, Barney, was Barney's the name of the still, was a pear brandy, right? So we had some local pear brandy that we put in there, or pear wine that we put in there, and then distilled off the wine and produced pear brandy. And at the end of the day, you basically open up the still, drain it out, and then spray it down with a hose, and go home. And it's kind of steaming, from the heat of the humidity of the pear and everything, and you go home. The next day we came in, and the entire beautiful copper still was purple, like an amethyst, like bright, beautiful amethyst color. And we're like, oh my gosh, what happened, right? And so we start talking to a chemist on the internet. You know, you start asking questions. And finally, we got an answer from a guy in Scotland who said that, what happens is pear has in the seeds, there's a chemical called cyanouranic acid, and that's common in the seeds. And when in contact with copper at a low pH, so low pH 3.5, which is where wine lives, it will react with copper and turn it purple. And we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. You have this beautiful purple still. Nobody has a purple still like ours. And then like 2 or 3 days later, the beautiful purple kind of tarnished to like this kind of concrete gray, right? Just not pretty at all. And so we were like, oh, that stinks.
That's much worse.
Yeah. And so we basically, at that point, we were like, well, we'll just polish it back and take it back to the copper color. And every time we polish it, it comes back purple and then it fades out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so the still continues to want to be purple. So we call them Barney.
Nice.
As a result of that.
So I guess it's enough of a reaction. It goes
it's embedded.
Enough layers down.
It's a few whatever molecules deep in there. Yeah. But there's enough of it in there. You can get a little purple patina every now and then on that still.
That's cool.
So even if you come visit, you can see little glints of purple, and that's from
So you just need to make some more of that every once in a while, and you can reinvigorate
purple it up. Yeah, it was a pretty neat, again, cool chemistry at work.
So do you drink beer at all?
I do.
All right. So we normally close out asking, well, actually first, you always have things going on. So let's do a rundown of what you have coming out soon and what you have coming up.
Sure. Some events and things like that. Yeah. Let me get my calendar.
Okay.
So we have a very rich event calendar. September, which is coming to a close finally, it has been Virginia Spirits Month. And so we've had just a whole host of events. We typically will do things like dinners and bottling workshops. So in December, we're going to have a distillery dinner where we do a 4-course at the distillery. And that's a really nice thing, especially before Christmas. It's kind of a really nice way to kick off the holidays. During Spirits Month, we've been doing a lot of restaurant visits and things like that. And then we do, through the end of the year, once a month, we are doing bottling workshops. So people can come for free and they can bottle whiskey and take home a bottle that they did themselves, or 2 or 3 or whatever, and they can write on the label and say, hey, Grandma, thank you for, whatever, and do stuff like that. So that's kind of cool. We've got a dinner tonight, actually, at DC Prime, which is a steakhouse in Virginia. And then there's bar takeovers at Bravo, and Becky's doing something in Maryland at Snifter's Bistro, which is, I think, out near Annapolis kind of area. She's going to meet the distiller, so people get to have dinner with her and meet and discuss. Lots of stuff on our website. If you hit the events link on our website, there's a lot of cool stuff on there.
So that's do you do any of the distilling, or has Becky always been? For the most part,
it's Becky. Yeah, if I behave, she lets me. I have done distilling, and if she goes on like a week to see her mom or something like that, then I'll kick in and do it. But generally,
does she leave you detailed instructions so you don't mess it up?
Absolutely, and then she calls me every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
My problem with distilling is it's meticulous work, and I have a short attention span, right? And so I start getting into the Facebooking of it, not the doing of it.
Documenting it instead of
and your performance can be measured in the efficiency or the output quantity. So like Becky can, from one run generate like say 56 proof gallons of liquor, and I might have 34, and she's like, oh, good Lord,
what were you doing?
It's not that it's not good, it's just not as efficient. Like she's getting a better run than I am.
Yeah. And a lot of that's from the fermentation side of it too, right?
Yeah, that part's a little bit easier. The distilling really is like meticulous, like coming over every 5 minutes, tasting it, adjusting the system, tasting it, adjusting the system. And that's what really separates crafts from some of the industrial ones, where it's just an automated kind of 24-hour process.
And they just do it by time.
It's always
do the cuts. They don't even do cuts.
No, it's a column still. So they just keep it fired all the time, and they keep feeding it input wash. But the pot still process, it's a batch process, right? So you put something in, you run it for 9 hours, and then it's over, and you empty it out and redo another batch. And so that part of it, that's really, I think, where the real selection is made to make this a really high-end kind of product.
Okay. So then we got all that out of the way. What is your favorite? We'll stay in Virginia.
Okay.
What is your favorite Virginia beer, or in your top 5?
In my top 5, I would definitely start with Adroit. I think Adroit is a great company. The Dia de los Muertos that they put out is a really rich. I'm kind of either on the super dark end of the spectrum with beer or the super light end of the spectrum with beer. So I like, a really light Kolsch, or I like a really heavy, Russian Imperial Stout. I don't much care for super hoppy IPAs. It's not my jam. So I usually stick to something less hoppy. I'm kind of a malt head. But the Adroit Theory beers are fantastic. Love the guys over at Old Ox. I love drinking. There's so many in Virginia.
There are. They're really close to each other, right in that little pocket.
Yeah, and they're really good. There's a lot of really good beer in the area.
So this is a single malt whiskey with 25% chocolate malt.
Oh, wow.
And then infused with Meridian and UK Goldings hops.
Okay.
Put into the gin basket.
Sweet.
It was aged. So there's the finished, what will be the finished product, sitting in a 30-gallon barrel that'll be out in whenever it's ready.
Right.
And sometime in early 2020, probably.
So this is a barrel sample before it's really to market?
I have a barrel sample flask too, but this is I had a little 3-liter barrel.
Oh, cool.
So this was a month in the 3-liter barrel.
Gotcha. So this is a preview kind of.
Yes.
Yeah, you can really taste the hops come through.
It's amazing how much this is. It was very different taste.
You can taste the chocolate on the second. Yeah, the first thing hops and then chocolate comes in.
So it is early on. It tasted, especially right off the still, but even for a while, tasting it afterwards, it tasted like chocolate covered banana or chocolate covered papaya.
I believe that.
The hops come out much more prominently, like as you just said in the beginning now.
Well, what's interesting, we've done a couple hopped single malts, one of them with Adroit, and what's interesting about it is the new make. We didn't detect any hop flavor at all. It just tasted like a grain whiskey. Like, it was good, but there was no hop there. And then for some reason, hops seems to blossom in the barrel. And some interaction with the wood. And like in our case, it turned into lavender and daisies and chamomile. I mean, it was a really floral kind of thing. The chocolate is pretty prevalent in this one too.
I like where this has gone. It's very different, but it's great. I can't wait to taste the finished version of this.
No, this is really fun. That's the great thing about craft, and the great thing about whether it's beer or whiskey is, viva la différence, right? I mean, it's like, why should everything taste the same?
Yeah.
People, the traditionalists will come at you with, well, you're not doing it the traditional way. It's like, well, you already have that. Let me try something different, right? Why not? If you don't like it, you don't have to drink it, but, let's innovate. Let's try something new.
And that's what I love. I mean, brewers have been doing that for quite some time now, just throwing out style books and doing whatever they want.
Right.
That seems to be a fairly new trend in spirits.
Totally.
And then even now in the wine world, which I'm completely oblivious to,
right.
There's a few wineries that seem to be like on the cutting edge of throwing out those traditions and trying new things.
Well, it's a couple of interesting points, because the like the Reinheitsgebot, for German beer, right? It's like the purity laws were there to keep quality up, right? But now Germans, I was born and raised in Germany, so I have a good window into that culture. And Germans lament the fact that they're missing out on what the Americans have seen.
Yeah.
It's this innovation and these cool beers and all this kind of stuff. And some of it might be really crazy and some of it might be really gross. But, there's a lot of cool stuff that comes out of it that the Germans are just simply not allowed to make.
I think that they would abandon that at some point.
Yeah, but, again, they're a very rule-following culture. So, they sort of revel in it, and at the other extreme of that, I think of Adroit Theory, right? These guys are getting name recognition for being absolutely bonkers in some ways, right? They did, Pad Thai beer. Yeah. They did beer with that tasted like a Bloody Mary. I like to think of them as like the Andy Warhol of beer, right? It's crazy, it's innovative, but they're pushing boundaries. They're they're trying new things, and they're getting noticed for it too. So it's, would I have a Rice Krispies beer every weekend after I mow my grass? Probably not. Yeah,
but
it's a cool thing to experiment with, and it's pushing boundaries, which I think is a useful endeavor.
I agree. So is there anything else you want to cover? Or?
No, I don't think so. About to start a 3-week trip to Europe to promote spirits over there.
Oh, awesome.
So that'll be good. And
how long did you just get into Europe?
No, we've been working on the market for 5 years.
Okay.
So we have a really nice business in Italy. And that was actually something new to me. At the time when our business started to flourish in Italy, I was kind of like, that's kind of strange. Like, why Italy? But then I had to realize it, and it really hit me after my first trip over there. We went into these bars, and since forever, every cocktail bar, half of the ingredients are Italian. Vermouth and Campari and Aperol. All these ingredients are Italian mixers that we're putting with American spirits, right? Yeah. Over there, it's all the home stuff is the mixers, and then they want to bring over American spirits, whiskeys and gins and vodkas and things. And so it's always been a natural 50-50 partnership, and I just didn't appreciate it. So we have a really nice business in Italy. I'm going to be in Holland and Germany and the UK as well. So all of those markets are pretty important to us.
How's your gin do in the UK?
Gin, for the most part, it's pretty small. It's pretty small, and just like in America, everybody's got a gin, right? Yeah. And so a lot of places don't even bring out the bottle, and it's like, all right, what we're really known for is the whiskey. Yeah, and there's a story to tell there. Virginia being a birthplace of American whiskey and things like that resonates in places like Germany and Holland. It's a little more caricatured. They all think we're a bunch of John Wayne cowboys over here. And, I'm happy to wear that hat and do that if I need to sell whiskey. But there is a great appreciation for American craft in Europe, which is it's kind of cool to know.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in and bringing your amazing product with you. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Cheers.